All right, we are going to go over Chapter 2, Lesson 1. Conditional statement is a statement using a hypothesis and a conclusion. So your hypothesis is normally based on P's, your conclusion is using Q's. These are all going to be logic-based. Okay, so the statements we're doing are kind of logic-based. So they're always written in if-then statements, and an example that they're giving us is if you study, then you will get an A. So this part being your hypothesis, also known as your P, and then your conclusion, which is your Q. So keep in mind, if you study, then you get an A. That's not always true. So when you're looking at these, they don't have to be true. Negation of a statement is the opposite. Super important that you know it is going to be the opposite. Okay, it's not that I'm making it negative, it's just that you're using the opposite. So an example is it is raining. The opposite is it is not raining. Another example, the shirt is not red. The shirt is red. So two opposites. Converse. Converse is the conditional, but you're switching the order. So switch the order. You gotta write that. Switch order. So the first one was, if you studied, then you will get an A. And you're flipping it. If you get an A, then you studied. So again, you're just switching the order. Inverse. Inverse is formed by negating it, negating the original statement, which is my conditional statement. So this is my conditional statement. And you're negating it now. So we started out with, if you study. So if you study, then you get an A. And we are now negating it. So it's still the same order. If you didn't study, then you didn't get an A. So the change is going to be this word. Okay, I'm doing the opposite statement. So studying, the opposite is didn't study. Contrapositive. This one is flipped and negated. You're going to flip it and negate it. So looking at the examples, you can see that for my original statement, I'm going to flip it. So my original statement again, if you study, then you get an A. This is my conditional statement. I'm going to then go to my converse, so here's me flipping it. If you get an A, then you study. And then don't forget, you're going to go ahead and negate it. So it's still the same order as my converse, but now I'm negating it. If you didn't get an A, then you didn't study. So I'm doing two things, flipping it and negating it. A good way to remember this is you have the largest word. Okay, so here's a little hint. The longest one, oops, that's not an L. The longest word, you have to do the most work. Okay, flipping it and negating it. This is the only one that has both. Biconditional statement. With your biconditional statement, in order for you to use it, the only time you're using it is when your conditional statement and its converse are both true. That's the only time you can use a biconditional statement. Super important. So your conditional statement and your converse both have to be true. And when you're writing a biconditional statement, you're changing your if-then to an if and only if. Okay, you could abbreviate it. You can abbreviate it as IFF, and I will write that on here. You could use that. You could abbreviate it to IFF. That's a shortened if and only if. Okay, so looking at this example, again, both your conditional and your converse have to be true. It says if an angle has a measure of 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Is that true? Yes. If the angle has a measure of 90 degrees, it is a right angle. So state the converse. Is it true? So let's figure it out. My converse would be, this is my conditional. My converse is going to be if, let me write it in black. If an angle is a right angle, then it has a measure of 90 degrees. So this is my converse. Is it true? Yes, it is. All right. So if they're both true, we stated that both my conditional and converse are true. I'm going to go ahead and write my biconditional statement. Okay, my biconditional statement, a couple things we need to know. You're going to take out the if and then, and you're going to use if and only if. Okay, so for my biconditional statement, I could use, that's the format I have to use. So when you're writing a biconditional statement, you could write it either as your conditional or your converse. Okay, I'm going to make a note of that. You can write it as conditional or converse. So I'm going to go ahead and write it. One way I can write my biconditional statement is an angle has a measure of 90 degrees if and only if, so I'm abbreviating it, it is a right angle. Okay, that's one way I can write it, or I could write it as an angle is a right angle if and only if it has a measure of 90 degrees. Okay, two ways you can write it. All right, looking at this is the kind of conditional statements written so you could see the P's and the Q's. So when you're looking at this, your conditional statement is your PQ, your converse is flipped, so you're switching. Your inverse is similar to your conditional statement, but it's negated. And then your last one, which is your contrapositive, and that's both negated and flipped. So this one's the long one. Flip and negate. And then your biconditional statement, again, can only be used if your conditional and converse are both true. Okay, and this one is using that keywords if and only if, which could be abbreviated as IFF. Looking at these examples, it says use red to identify the hypothesis and blue to identify the conclusion, then rewrite the conditional statement in an if-then form. So for A, they're telling me a bird has feathers. So I'm going to change this to a statement. If an animal is a bird, then it has feathers. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my hypothesis. So my hypothesis is an animal is a bird. My conclusion is then it has feathers. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with B. You are in Texas if you are in Houston. So again, my statement's going to be if you are in Houston, then you are in Texas. So looking at it, my hypothesis is going to be you are in Houston. And then my conclusion is you are in Texas. Looking at example number 2, it says let P be your guitar player and let Q be your musician. Write each statement in words, then describe whether it is true and false. So looking at it, they're giving us how they want us to write it. So we have our P, you are a guitar player. Look at where all my P's are going. And then my Q is you are a musician. And then don't forget, you are negating some of these. So let's go ahead and do my conditional statement. So A, my conditional statement is going to be if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. So state whether this is true or false. This is going to be a true statement. If you're a guitar player, then you're a musician. So you play some sort of instrument. All right, looking at the second one, so this is going to be by B. If, now I'm flipping it. If you are a musician, oh my gosh, I can't spell. If you are a musician, then you are a guitar player. So looking at this one, it could be false because a musician could play drums, could play the flute, could play the violin. So this one's going to be false. All right, looking at the next one, C. This one is inverse, so now I'm writing my conditional, but I'm negating it. So if you are not a guitar player, then you are not a musician. Again, this one is going to be false. Why? Because you could play an instrument other than a guitar. You don't have to play a guitar. And the last one, which is D, contrapositive. So I'm flipping it and I'm negating it. If you are not a musician, then you, it's an O, are not a guitar player. This one is going to be true. All right, for this one it says rewrite the definition of perpendicular lines as a single biconditional statement. So I'm going to highlight my hypothesis. So this is my hypothesis right here. Then I have my conclusion. So if two lines intersect to form a right angle, then they are perpendicular lines. I'm going to write this as a biconditional statement. So I have to get rid of my if then, and I have to use my if and only if. So I'm going to write this one as, I'm just going to separate them to show you it's two lines intersect to form a right angle if and only if they are perpendicular lines. Keep in mind I could also flip this one and I could write it as two lines are perpendicular lines if and only if they form a right angle. Oops, forgot my N. All right, and the last example says rewrite the pair of conditionals as a biconditional statement. So I'm going to go ahead and write these. I have two. I will call the first one my conditional statement. So looking at it, I have if M is between L and N, then LMN plus MN is LN. Again, looking at the next one, it says if LM plus MN equals LN, then M is between L and N. So I'm going to write both of these. This should be red. So I'm going to write both these as a biconditional statement. So my first one is going to be M is between L and N if and only if LM plus MN equals LN. And then the second one I'm going to write as a biconditional statement. This is going to be LM plus MN is LN if and only if M is between L and N.